Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we're going to be continuing my 13 Days of Halloween series with The Midnight Club, directed by Mike Flanagan and a whole bunch of other people. Mike Flanagan is the creator of the show and he's getting a lot of the credits, but honestly, this show has a whole ensemble of writers and directors, along with a whole ensemble in front of the camera as well for the cast that is just absolutely phenomenal. And if you've seen my channel for any amount of time, you know that I am the biggest fan of Mike Flanagan. There's not a single thing that he has done that I have disliked. I love all of his movies, and his shows are near masterpieces. I love The Haunting of Hill House. I have it on Blu-ray, and Midnight Mass is also a masterpiece. Haunting of Bly Manor is also really great, and I think that The Midnight Club is just as good as that series as well. And so we are going to be getting to spoilers for The Midnight Club. So if you've not seen all 10 episodes on Netflix, I highly recommend it, especially if you're a fan of, Mike Flanagan and horror. But the show honestly is more of a character piece of exploring all these different characters through a way of storytelling and just kind of an ode to storytelling itself. So what is The Midnight Club about? Essentially, it's about these 8 patients in this hospice who are all teenagers dealing with terminal illnesses. They don't have long to live, and so at midnight they all get together and they tell scary stories that all have something to do with their own lives in some way or another. They are kind of putting themselves in their art, which is essentially what artists do whenever they write stories. And through the stories that they tell, you get to see, what the deal is with these characters, kind of a window into the spirits of all these characters. And if you know Mike Flanagan's work, whenever there's a ghost type thing in any show or movie that he does, the ghosts always represent something. And so, in this show, they say that stories are essentially what you leave behind as your legacy. They are your ghosts. The stories that you tell and the stories that people tell about you, that is your spirit after you die. And so that is kind of what all these stories mean in this show, which again, storytelling is something that Mike Flanagan is very passionate about. You can see that he's putting it into this series, and it's just such a great way to just convey all these characters throughout the entire show. And so the show isn't necessarily completely horror. I will say that all of his shows are vastly different. Of course, Haunting of Hill House is the real scary one. If you're looking for a Mike Flanagan piece that's just purely terrifying, I don't think he's done anything nearly as scary as he has done with the Haunting of Hill House. Haunting of Bly Manor was more of a gothic romance, which is on its own a really cool idea. And then of course you have Midnight Mass, which is just a really deep dive into both horror, but also a deep dive into religion and how, different religious aspects mean different things to different people. And I think that show is just beautifully written with all the monologues. And this one is really a young adult adaptation of a book that is just an exploration of these characters and how they feel and what they're dealing with their terminal illnesses, and all these stories that they tell. Some of them are horror, some of them are purely terrifying, but others are just, either horror comedy or they're just straight up not horror at all. Some of them are sci-fi, some of them are just, really out there concepts. One of them is a noir mystery story, which is really cool. Iman Benson plays Ilonka, who is kind of the main character of this series. She's the character that you start off with, and she discovers that she has this terminal illness, and after all these medications and all these chemotherapies fail her, she goes to try to find some healing in other ways, which is where she discovers this hospice. And she finds this one character that had gone to this hospice and she got out healed, and so she thinks maybe there's something behind that. She disappeared for 2 weeks when she was at that hospice, and she returned and all of a sudden she was miraculously healed, and so she thinks there's something at this place, something special about this place that can get her healed. So that is why she is at this hospice, and she forms this great friendship with Anya, played by Ruth Codd, and I will say she was my favorite character of the series by far. I absolutely loved Ruth Codd in this role. She was perfect. She was such a bitch the entire time, but also she was so lovable. She had such a great heart to her character as well. She kind of hid behind all these things that she said, even though she had just a deep passion behind her eyes and all the stories that she told. And the episode where she did die, and you're seeing all the different stories kind of come together into one piece because she's now living in the stories that her friends are telling. That entire episode when she's in her coma is so heartbreaking, and I think that her performance and her friendship with Ilonka was so great throughout this entire thing. 2 other characters that I absolutely loved in this show were kind of side characters in this, and that was Spence and Natsuki, and they both had their moments to shine when they were telling their stories. Especially Natsuki's were some of the most emotionally wrapped up I was with any of the characters in this show. And so when Natsuki was telling her story about her driving when she was attempting suicide in her garage, she turned on her car, closed the garage, and had all the fumes going on inside her car, and she passed out, and this vision that she saw saw of her driving on this endless road, stopping at these gas stations, seeing the same person over and over and over again, driving on the road. And this was the episode where Henry Thomas had his cameo in this, which, with Mike Flanagan, of course, he's going to pull all these different actors that, have been played in different series or movies that he's done. And so this was Alex Esso and Henry Thomas making an appearance in this episode. And it was just so emotionally wrapped up with it. And the way that she ended her story with her character crawling up and opening that garage herself, but then she broke down and told AMESH the true story of how it actually happened, of how her mom found her all bloated and just, in such bad shape, and she kind of saved her life in that way, only to find out that she's terminally ill with a different disease in general, was just absolutely heartbreaking. That was also one of my favorite episodes. And when it comes to Spence's character, he had 2 stories, I believe, in this that I absolutely loved. It was the second story where he was like a time-traveling Terminator robot that was actually really, really interesting. His first story was great as well, but his actual real-life stuff with him and his parents, especially with his mom, and that, monologue that he has talking to her saying that he loves himself and he loves her even though she does not feel the same because he is gay, was such a great monologue. It was so, so good. This actor is great, and all these kid actors in this entire series, all these teenagers, are so good in their roles. There was, one of them who was in Midnight Mass, or 2 of them were in Midnight Mass, but the rest of them are new to Mike Flanagan and him working with different characters or different actors. And I hope to see all these characters, especially Ruth Codd. I think she's going to be in Mike Flanagan's next thing. I don't know if it's the Fall of the House of Usher. I think that's one that she's going to be in, but all these characters were so great. All these actors were performing such great performances, and all the stories, especially Kevin, who was in Midnight Mass, and this, this character telling his story, and he'd always end on a cliffhanger. He's always like, to be continued. If you live long enough, you shall see the rest of the story. And so you get to go back to his story, this, serial killer type of storyline that's, he, and also whenever you get to any of these stories, you get to see flashes of the stories that they're telling, and all the actors in the series are playing different characters inside of the stories themselves. So it's great to see all these characters playing different roles. You get to see this character, Kevin's actor, playing this serial killer type character in his stories, and you get to see this throughout 3 episodes. And that was really fun because there's a lot of running jokes with that. And in terms of the comedy, the show is actually very, very funny. It is dark, of course, because all of them are going to die. Essentially, they're all going to die, and it's very heart-wrenching when some of that stuff happens, when they're kind of accepting their own death. It's very heavy. It's very tough to watch at times. But these characters and these actors bring such a life to their roles it is so fun to watch. The whole thing with SANDRA and the angel porn, and the fact that AMESH told his story and ended it with angels and she was asleep, that running joke with the angels was really funny. The running joke with, the story told by Spence, and then him making up the football team names, and then Kevin making fun of the team names that he's making up throughout the entire story was really funny. It was always funny when they're telling the stories and you're so wrapped up in it, and all of a sudden somebody, cuts in, and then it cuts back to the Midnight Club, and you see them all around the table, and they're just kind of, busting each other's balls with different things of their stories, and just kind of criticizing each other's work, or kind of asking them questions, or kind of interacting with these stories. That was just so much fun. And of course, in Ilonka's, 2-part story of the witches, by the end of it, she's just so heartbroken over, Anya's death that she can't finish her story, and that's when everybody else who's still around start adding on to the story, and they all finish the stories together because they have created such a strong bond with everybody in this show that it was just very touching. But when it comes to the whole reason that Ilonka came to this, hospice in the first place with the whole Julia Jayne story, I really like seeing that in the first episode, to kind of see the format of the show and how it's going to flash, to see these different storylines, some of them true, some of them, completely fantasy, like the time travel stuff, or the video game one with Raul Coley, which was also great to see. But when it came to this whole Julia Jayne thing, and then of course you have Samantha Sloan playing the older Julia, and I predicted that it was her, at the beginning, because you don't at first know that she is Julia, all grown up. She is the one who survived, and she's kind of talking to Ilonka, trying to convince her about all this witchcraft stuff with this cult that also owned, this estate before, and so there's this magic in there, and she truly believes, because she thinks that is what healed her all those years ago. And so that entire storyline with Samantha Sloan, I thought was a little bit predictable, mainly because I hated Samantha Sloan so much in Midnight Mass, because she was so great in that show. She played such a great hateable character in that, and when I saw her in this, I just had an instant distrust in her. And that was kind of the opposite with Heather Langenkamp, who played the owner of this hospice. She was the doctor. She did all the therapy sessions with them, and she kind of ran things, and she apparently knew about the Midnight Club this entire time and all of this cult stuff the entire time. And there were some aspects of the show trying to make you distrust her in different ways, but it's Heather Langenkamp. I love her in the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. Whenever she's in one of those nightmare movies, usually those are the good ones. Actually, I think all three that she's in are the great nightmare movies. And so her being in this movie, I just wanted to trust her because she's so great. But she also did get to play a few villains in some of the stories that they tell. But that kind of pushed me to thinking that she was a good person in the actual grand scheme of the real world situation that they're in. And so that's essentially what it was. And I think that this whole storyline that's actually happening in the hospice, it didn't feel like it was needed in this because of the stories that the characters are telling, and because it's a window into all their spirits and all their souls, and just getting to know these characters so well throughout their storytelling. I didn't feel like any of these supernatural stuff, or the things that you think is supernatural in the real world, I didn't think that worked too well. It wasn't necessarily bad. I did like Samantha Sloan in the show. Of course, she is a great actress. I just think that it ended in a way where she kind of just ran off. You never get to see her again. And I know they're kind of thinking about doing a season 2 with this. I hope that people watch it and Netflix decides to greenlight a second season. It's not necessarily needed, but there is a little cliffhanger with Heather Langenkamp at the very end, with her, taking off her wig. She's bald and she has that symbol tattooed to her neck. So there's something behind her. I think she might be the daughter that is, part of the cult thing that ran away, the one who was actually good. I think that is who she is, because they're talking about how she went missing and she doesn't talk to her mother anymore, and we don't necessarily know who the daughter is. And that kind of, difference between Samantha Sloan's character and then, Heather Langenkamp's character, if she is that daughter, the two, the actual daughter versus the daughter who actually likes, all the spiritual stuff that they're doing with this cult, and how those two characters are kind of like the good and the evil of the same coin. Some of that stuff is interesting, but like I said, because those stories that they're telling throughout this entire series, and because of those characters and what they're going through is so emotionally investing, all this other stuff outside of that felt like it was just kind of added on top of it to have a supernatural element in the real world. I don't think the show needed a supernatural element. There was a couple of ghosts that you see in this, hospice. You see this old man and this old woman, and you don't really figure out exactly what they stood for. I think it definitely was that conversation where they had, whereas the Dream Eaters. I think that makes a lot of sense, especially when you have all these kids who are dying super young in their lives, and you have these, creatures or these spirits that are essentially feeding off of all the years lost from all these poor kids. I think that is a good idea. I just don't think, again, I don't think that was fully necessary if they're not going to go fully diving into those storylines and kind of building a backstory for those ghosts, or building a true purpose for those ghosts. So I don't think all of that fully works. But for the most part, I really, really did enjoy watching all 10 episodes of this. Like I said, the stories that they told, every single one of them had their own charms, whether they were the straight up horror ones, or the noir, or the just fun sci-fi stuff, or the video game one, which I also really liked. Every single story I got so invested in. Every single character, all these kids, I got so invested in. When I think it was Sandra's character, and you have her arc with Spence's character, and all those storylines happening with that, and then when she finds out that she is actually, she was misdiagnosed with her terminal illness and she's actually going to go home, I was very happy for her, even though she was kind of a point of contention with all these characters. There are a lot of arguments, surrounding her character and what she did throughout the show. But once she did find out that she was actually being healed, I really liked it. I felt so happy for her. I felt so happy for this group, and I still feel dread for everybody else, but everybody else's character kind of accepted the situation that we're in. And so me as an audience member, I accepted the fates of all these characters. So in that way, I don't need a season 2 because I really don't want to see these characters die. But if they do a season 2, I'd be right on board. I really enjoyed this show. I think it is on par with Honey of Bly Manor in terms of how I'd rank the shows. I still think that Midnight Mass and Honey of Hill House are truly something special, but again, Mike Flanagan has never done anything bad in my opinion. I really dug everything about this thing. And so those are my thoughts on the Midnight Club. What are you guys' thoughts on this series as a whole? But also my question for you guys is, what was your favorite story told in this entire series? Because again, that format of storytelling really worked for me. So thanks everybody for watching this video. If you enjoyed, make sure you guys subscribe to the channel to see more reviews, especially in my 13 Days of Halloween series. I did my review of Werewolf by Night, which is on the channel, but also my Terrifier 2 review is blowing up right now. So if you guys have not checked that video out, definitely go check that one out as well. And thanks everybody for watching this video. Subscribe, like, comment down below, and I hope to see you all in my next one.